I think we'll get started. It's past 7 o'clock. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting for April 10th, 2018. This meeting is being video recorded, and you should know that. And we always start our meetings with a moment of appreciation for our troops serving in the Middle East and around the world. Thank you. We're starting with a joint meeting with the Warrant Committee and the School Committee, so I'll ask the chairs of each committee to call their meetings to order.
Is someone taking meeting minutes?
Christine, are you taking meeting minutes? So I think Christine will take the minutes. Okay. She'll circulate them to each committee. And
thank you.
Hopefully the minutes.
Is there a motion to convene?
Hopefully the minutes of all three committees will resemble each other.
For all of them.
Right. I know. That's what I'm saying. Yes, thank you. Anna Mae, ready?
Yes, I hereby call this meeting to order.
Great. All right. Thank you. So I think we have three primary objectives of the joint portion of this meeting tonight, and then when that part is done, the Board of Selectmen meeting will continue beyond that, and everyone else can go home, except for Bill. Sorry. So the three objectives, the first is to get on the same page procedurally with respect to Articles 11 and Articles 45, which are the articles for the operating budgets. Article 11, the standard budget article, and Article 45, which will be the override article. And I want to just pause for a moment and thank the many members of our town administration who have put an awful lot of work over the last week into getting ready for this discussion and crunching through these numbers and trying to get us on the same page. So many thanks to Matt Violette and Joy Rasciuto, Georgia Kalivas, Yvonne Remillard, Mike Sullivan, Christine Truweiler, Michael LaFrancesca, Dr. Marsden. Thank you very much for all the work that's been done to get to that point. So that first issue is the procedural question, so that we can put into the warrant report and have available for folks before town meeting exactly what we'll be discussing and debating on town meeting floor with respect to the differing positions on the budget. And to that end, you should all have a copy of two sheets, one of which has a lot of numbers on it, and it looks like a traditional warrant committee tracking sheet, which has three scenarios built off for Article 45, building off of Article 11, which is the balanced budget scenario, and then there's this sheet, which is really the same thing, but this is what the articles will actually look like at town meeting. So this has, the second sheet has the incremental dollar values in each of the scenarios, because the way the warrant is set up, Article 45 is going to be subject to an override, and it's contingent upon that, so any amounts that are appropriated in Article 45, if the override election is not successful, would not be appropriated and would revert back to the Article 11 balanced budget. And then the second and third things I wanted to talk through, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to reach a resolution on 1, 2, and 3, maybe not, but I want to talk through kind of the discussions and the issues we've talked about with smaller groups with respect to a potential agreement on future budgets with respect to the Selectmen and the School Committee, and kind of what the different override numbers mean in the school budget and in the town budgets. And then finally, a discussion, really I want to hear from folks in the School Committee with respect to the draft capital and long-term financial obligations policy that we've been discussing. We've discussed it a lot on the Board of Selectmen. We haven't had a chance to discuss that with the School Committee, and obviously any feedback from the Warrant Committee would be helpful as well. So let's start with kind of the procedural issue, which is sort of the presentation of the articles at town meeting. So does everyone have the sheet up here? All right, and thank you to Sharon. Sharon has been Excel filing at a very high level over the past week, and working with folks to put this together. So what you see on this sheet is starting with Article 11, which is our standard budget article, and this is the proposed allocation among the budgets to reach a balanced budget without an override. And Article 45, Scenario 1, effectively is the Warrant Committee budget, and so this is the Warrant Committee budget, which would require an override for those operating budgets. And Scenario 3 is the Warrant Committee budget plus the School Committee budget at 6.16%. And Scenario 2 is the Warrant Committee budget plus the school budget at 4.86%. So those are the three scenarios we've kind of put together, kind of trying to organize the various discussions that have happened at our meetings over the last couple of weeks to arrive at something that will fairly reflect the choices and the debates that the attendees at town meeting will have this year. So with that introduction, I think I will throw it open for comment on this approach and suggestions, criticism, lavish praise, whatever you want to have.
Or when you have so many people, I'm not a wallflower. Michael, I think this approach makes sense, you know, from, as a member of the finance committee and the school committee. We don't have any interest in going to town meeting in a circumstance where we're in a battle with the town departments over saying, you know, the school wants to increase its budget at the expense of town departments. So that's never been the way we've done it in town. Certainly, you know, you and Michael recommend to your departments what their budget should be. We do the same, and I think this approach allows us to advocate for a budget for the schools without having to say it's either us or them, and I think that's important. But this meeting is unprecedented, as far as I'm aware. I've been on 8 years, and certainly before I was elected and was in town, we haven't had a meeting of all three boards, the two elected boards and the warrant committee, but I think it's helpful to talk about an approach this way, particularly in what is such a difficult budget year. I did have a question on the various scenarios. I've seen thrown around a bunch of different spreadsheets about the tax impact of the overrides, and I just wonder if anybody knows what the increase in the average tax bill is under Article 11 by itself.
That would, I think it's 2.97%.
Well, 2 point what?
I think isn't it 2.97%?
What's that in dollars, do we know? Well, the budget is increasing by 3.16. There are receipts in there, I assume. Do we know what that is in dollars?
If a $10,000 tax bill, that would be $290.
And is 10,000 an average tax bill, or is it?
10,800, I believe, for the average tax bill.
So that's the baseline, Prop 2.5, no override, $290 average tax increase.
From the school committee standpoint, I think, you know, I understand people are reluctant. I'll shut this, my spreadsheets are there to try to follow along with, but I understand people are reluctant to endorse such a large increase in the school budget, and we don't do it willingly. And part of the reason we do it at all is because, as many of you know, when we got together to talk about the capital issues associated with Dale Street, there were a number of us who gathered over February vacation. And it became clear that the town, that Michael said, the town was certainly going to need an override. It was a larger number at the time. And the school committee is and has been committed for a long time to avoid the practice that existed before I was on the board, which was to have serial overrides. So many of you will remember, we went a number of years where we'd have, you know, 250 this year, 500 the next year, 350, and it was, you know, I think there was a very real sense of voter fatigue, and I would have, you know, as a voter, been fatigued by it as well. So, you know, when we had an override 8 years ago, 7 years ago, no, 8 years ago, that was the first in about 5 years, and we haven't had one since. And I think that the problem simply is that the way the budgets are set up, the way Medfield is committed to excellence, not only in its schools but in all its departments, there's a structural deficiency, and it can't be, you just simply can't keep going along with the 2.5% increase every year and deliver the same level of services. You know, the school department alone, our personnel costs increase by more than 4% every year, and I'm sure that's true in other departments, particularly those with collective bargaining agreements as well. So from our perspective, the most responsible thing to do is to put ourselves in a position to again, as we did 8 years ago, level set the budget so that we can expect another long period of time where we're not going back and fatiguing the voters. And that's why we circulated the memorandum of understanding, because we think we certainly can make a commitment. We don't think we shouldn't necessarily be required to, because again, it's been 8 years. We're not one of those committees that comes back every year or 2 years for an override, but we're happy to if it gives these boards and particularly the Board of Selectmen and the voters more confidence in the numbers. Now, the reason that means we need a 6.16% budget is that you have to have some one-time expenses that you'll be able to move forward. Last time we all supported an override, you may remember we built in what otherwise would have been capital expenses and were one-time expenses for what really are now extinct systems at these schools. There were whiteboards, projectors, desktop computers. Their useful life is long gone, but the override, we certainly needed them at the time, and the override we passed at the time enabled us to have what has been a really, I think, unprecedented, since Prop 2.5 passed, unprecedented period of not having operational overrides in the town. And we think that this is a more modest, I think the 700,000 is more modest than we had last time. I think last time was about 900,000. The schools are looking for about 713,000 in this proposal. But we think that will similarly put us on a path to long-term success. At a 4%, can we live with a 3% budget? Yes, we'll lose programs, we'll lose staff, we'll make cuts. Can we live with a 4% budget? Of course, and it will be the exact same thing. We'll lose positions, we'll lose programs. Can we live with a 4.86% budget? I know that part of that reason that's on here is because Dr. Morrison proposed it to us at one time. We absolutely can, and we can do that and preserve a lot of the things that are important to us in the budget. But if we do that, it's a sure bet that next year we're going to be right back in the same position where the school department won't be able to live with a 4% increase without making significant cuts that we think the voters don't want. I think the last election told us a lot about what the voters want, and I think that from our perspective, if the voters tell us in a special election that they don't want these, then that will certainly send a message as well. But in terms of sort of long-term stability, we think it's important to make a move now that enables us to forego overrides for the foreseeable future.
So that's bled a little bit into topics 2 and 3.
I think they're all related.
So I know you do. Well, with respect to the presentation piece of this, do we have other comments on how these are presented? What is in each of the articles in each of these scenarios? I think what we envision, there really will be 2 scenarios going into town meeting. There'll be the warrant committee's recommended budget and then the school committee's budget, and that will be handled. The moderator will handle probably by pairing the 2 articles. And so procedurally, I imagine it would be the school committee just placing a hold on the stated warrant committee number in the budget and then moving to amend it. But just in terms of presentation, Gus or Pete, do you have comments?
I think where you're headed, I think, makes sense to me.
I agree. Any issues from the warrant committee? Okay. Anything else over here? So it sounds like, at least on the easiest of the agenda items, what's going to go in there, I think we have some guidance, Christine, in terms of what we can put in the warrant report and what we can make available to folks before a town meeting. As is always the case, these things tend to change after everything is mailed and in advance of that, but at least people will have an understanding of where we are. So, all right, item 1 complete. Since Mr. Morrison has set the table on item 2, any responses, reactions, comments, criticism, praise, again, lavish praise?
I think your hair looks nice.
I meant towards what you had said.
I think it was brilliant.
You want me to start? All right.
I thought you were starting.
Yeah, no, I'm quite happy to start, but I often start. So given as many people as are in the room here, I didn't want to bull to the front. Chris, everything, the points you're making about the schools make sense. The part that's troubling me, especially this year, is the number of different items that are piling up that the voters are going to be asked to decide whether they want to approve overrides on. One of the things, and I guess partly because among all other things, I'm also at least partially not as deeply as you're involved in the senior housing, but the basic perspective that on one hand the town is trying to figure out ways to help seniors drive their taxes down, and we're going to try to do that through housing, but on the other hand, we're now looking at tax increases that are by the time we get the senior housing, the taxes on that senior housing will be equal to or higher than the taxes that the seniors are trying to get out from under in the housing they're in right now, and I worry about that. I'm not sure that everyone does see 4% increases, and I'm not criticizing that the teachers do, but I look at a lot of taxpayers and I don't see them having gotten even 2.5% increases over the past several years. So I don't want to just make this up as an absolute in opposition to what you say, but I have to basically point out that there's a bigger picture here around what the overall impact of this budget is going to be on the taxpayers. I don't believe that overall picture, what I look at right now, I'll listen to the Warrant Committee, but I think it's insane to put all the things that we have that could go on. I have a hard time believing that it's doing anybody a favor to do that. It will box taxpayers probably into making some hard and possibly not smart decisions because they'll have to pick one and not the other. And I'm worried about what that will do in terms of how we make our decisions this year. I look at the budget, I look at the trends in how funds have been spent between the schools and the town, and it feels to me like this is a year where we're kind of at a crossroads, that either our budget is going to continue to shift in the direction of schools, and we're going to more or less keep within Prop 2.5 limits at least most of the time. And if we do that, then that's at the expense of the town and several of the other things that go on. Or we do this for schools, we allow the town to grow, and we kind of throw our hands up on Prop 2.5 and say we're going to undermine that entire thing. We're going to accept that this is a town where if you can't keep up with the taxes, it's time for you to move on. And I'm not staking a position in the ground, but I can tell you this troubles me deeply in this year. And
Yeah, it troubles us to have to ask for an override as well. And, you know, as you know, the past several years, we've been at a point where we've considered it. At the beginning of every school year, first thing I say before pin nights begin is to the committee and to the superintendent, do we think we need an override this year? Because if so, we should start moving towards communicating with our parents about that. And I did that this year, and we thought, no, we don't need an override. And there, many years we have put it off because of a lot of these things that we have supported. Whether it's the public safety building, the public works building. We recognize that you can't, ask people to raise their taxes in, multiple ways at a time. And we're not suggesting that, you either have to pay the taxes or leave, but we do recognize that the schools are the lifeblood of the town. The schools are what makes the property values where they are. And of course, the schools are a bigger part of the budget than the operating budget because we have almost exponentially more employees than the rest of the town. So, that makes sense. Education is something, as I've talked a lot about this at the Warrant Committee, and I will forgo a speech, but I'll just say that education isn't static. Educational methods change regularly, what we need for materials change regularly, so our budgets change. We didn't have a few years ago that we recognized, maybe we needed it, but we didn't recognize a need for certain kinds of social-emotional learning supports. We didn't have I forget another name,
Special
education guidance.
Guidance at the elementary levels. A lot of those things we didn't have that we now need, and that towns all around us have recognized they needed because kids have just changed. The way kids live their lives and learn have changed. So again, we want to be responsible in setting a budget that will allow us to live within, for a foreseeable period, the bounds of Prop 2.5. I can't speak really what that means on the town side because I don't study your budgets. But I do know, and when you talk about the 4% increase, as you know, teacher contracts are fairly unique. They require increases on the base. Teachers also get increases for years of seniority, and if they move across what we call lanes, if they get more education. Not unlike the police union has similar steps and things like that. But
So I have a
certainly
question
because
for
it
you.
has a lot
I have a
bigger
question.
impact because there are a lot more of us.
I have a question for you. When you say you're prepared to live within the bounds of Prop 2.5, what does that mean?
Well, we proposed to you the memorandum of understanding, which would ensure that certain reserves are kept. That's part of the capital outlay. But it would, we would agree that our budget won't grow by more than 4% for the period of time.
I knew you were going to say that. And I'm saying, how is that living within the bounds of Prop 2.5?
Well, our budget has been about 4% each of the past, increase each of the past several years. Yours has been about 2% each of the past several years. To us, that makes, again, as you raise the levy, that sort of lifts all boats. So we believe that that can be done. Well, does that mean at the end of the 3-year period, we won't have to make cuts? I mean, we'll have to make cuts in the second year of the period, right? Because as I've already said, 4% is really less than level service for us. But, we understand that you can't just keep growing and growing and growing, and there will have to be difficult decisions made. We have, regularly over the course of the past several years, eliminated positions, and that's put us in a difficult position with some of our elementary classes now, where we need to start putting those positions back in. That's why we didn't recognize at the beginning of the year that we need an override, because a lot of those enrollment trends hadn't fully been realized to us. But that's the commitment we're willing to make, is that we won't push for an override. The school can't seek an override. Schools pass a budget. The Warrant Committee recommends a balanced budget within the town's revenues, and if the budgets that we all pass require an override, that's what happens. What we're saying is we will live within a 4% increase and agree not to press for an override, not to go to the voters for an override, through what is effectively the end of the next collective bargaining agreement for us. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
It may not alleviate
it
your
answers
concern, but-
it doesn't answer the problem. And I'm not shooting at you. I'm just saying
I
that
understand.
when there's a 4% on 2/3 of the town budget and a 2% on 1/3 of the town budget, and we're saying we're gonna live within Prop 2.5, I read that it's gonna be up to the town to figure out how to do that, because the schools won't. And I'm not arguing the trends in education, and I understand the pressures, but I'm saying as a practical matter, here in this town, project that trend out 20 years, and this is a town that has a school.
Well, I think.
And that's the thing, it's like someday we have to figure out how to get this thing to where it's sustainable at Prop 2.5, or the taxpayers have to say, Gus, stop. I really appreciate the thought, but we got the money, don't worry about it. And
Well, I
that may
think that's
happen.
true to a point, and that's why we're proud of the fact that in the last 12 years, we've only had the one override, because I think that's, 7 years ago, we had one, and I think the last one before that was 5 years. You think it was sooner?
Well, it was
Before I was on
07,
the
08, 09, 2011.
Okay,
7 years, right in the 7.
So I'm right in the 7 years.
12 years.
I'll stick with that, that's when
More than 7-year window. That's
There's
a good
only
window.
one in my time on the committee, we'll put it that way. And I think that has been the result of a lot of good collaboration between our boards and the Warrant Committee. And we're not at this point because we lost track of that collaboration. And we're at this point because 2.5% doesn't allow not only the growth of the school budget or the town budget, but it doesn't make sense in view of all of our other obligations. I mean, if we didn't have such a tremendous increase in health insurance costs, which I recognize are in
Yeah,
large part due to our
yeah,
teachers, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation, right?
Right.
And if there wasn't such a big unfunded mandated OPEB, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. It would be a very different
OPEB's
conversation.
not an unfunded mandate, it's a long-term financial obligation that we have.
But we haven't met,
Just to-
but back when we had the last override, we weren't meeting that at all, right? I mean, you're well aware of that because you've been championing it. So we hadn't been addressing that obligation at all. And so, a 2.5% increase doesn't allow the town to account for those things. And so we can be a town that sticks to 2.5%, no question about it, we can. We will not have the same level of educational service we have today. And I think that is the reason that we have the property values we do. That's why we have the tax levy we're able to have. And I think that's what the voters, at least the voters who move here and have been here during the school age time, that's the reason they're here. Now, I'm only 4 years from my kids being out of the district too. Maybe I'll change my position, although I hope I won't. But that's the reality.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to put a stake in the ground on a position. Everything in the political system is designed to drive costs down to the next level down, unfunded mandates you talk about, and the one voice that doesn't typically say, hey, I can't afford it, is the taxpayer. And so in this conversation, and it is a conversation, it's not a debate over positions, I want to make sure that voice gets heard.
Sure.
Because
Absolutely.
I'm not convinced that the voters across the town, some have, but I'm not convinced that the voters across the town have experienced the kind of steady growth in their incomes that our town is hoping it can maintain in its budgets. So I'm not sticking out a position, I'm pushing, but I'm just trying to raise the pressure.
I appreciate it.
Just maybe a couple things. I guess I appreciate this opportunity for all of us to get together. I think that it would actually make sense for us to do this at the beginning of the budget season too, to maybe set out some expectations in September or August even maybe. Like Chris, I'll admit that I don't know that much about the school budgets because I'm not as responsible for those, and so that I watch those from a distance. What I have sort of noticed over the years is even though the enrollments were decreasing, the school budgets were still going up, and I understand the salary increase requirements and the need for these new social emotional positions and other things that the schools are doing. I guess I don't have any solution or answer to all of that. I'm hoping that the Warrant Committee does, but I guess there just isn't enough for everything is the problem, and I guess it's just a question of where we're going to draw the different lines. So
Yeah, let me just, and I've talked at length with the Warrant Committee about this, so I'll be brief, but just in the last 7 years, just to tick off a few things that we didn't have. We didn't have the RISE program. We didn't have elementary guidance teachers. We didn't have iPads anywhere in the schools. We didn't have Wi-Fi in the schools. We didn't have a science curriculum. We didn't have, when I say we didn't have a science curriculum at the elementary level, I mean we didn't have a science curriculum at the elementary level. We were working off a whole bunch of different hodgepodges, and we've been working the past several years to fix that. What am I missing here? Things we've added.
Additional special education positions. I mean, we were understaffed in special education across the board. And we did an outside evaluation, and it was very, very clear that our numbers were not lining up with what we should have in terms of teachers providing services for kids. And, you know, we've added those positions the last couple of years, and we've added positions where teachers are working directly with kids. We've added positions where team chairs last year, which are really important because they allow our teachers to work with kids instead of, doing all the paperwork and all that stuff they needed to do with special ed. That most districts that I know of have team chairs that do all that work, so teachers work with kids. We now have that. It's working very, very well. So we've added all these positions that, frankly, were positions that everyone's had for years. It's not anything new. It's just new to Medfield.
So about 10 years ago, I was in a meeting with a school committee member from Westwood who expressed amazement at our spending per pupil in Medfield and wondered how we did it, but I guess that's how
Yeah.
We did it because we did it on the cheap.
It's funny, it's been a source of pride for us.
It shouldn't be.
And it's more, you know, we think it should be a little bit of a source of embarrassment. I mean, part of the reason we're able to do it is because we have, we've worked well with our teachers union. I mean, I know that, you know, Gus is right. I mean, that compared to what other professionals get, if you consider that they're getting 4%, and it's not really that every teacher does, that sounds like that's a lot compared to others. But we have worked well with our teachers union to keep, you know, the increases more reasonable than other towns. Sometimes we also have to hit a reset with them because they have, you know, opportunities, right? We also, frankly, in Medfield have done a lot because we have so many granting authorities, grants that come from MCPE and the PTO. They really prop up programs so that they can, they're paying to pilot programs in a lot of ways that later may find their way in the budget, whereas other districts put them in the budget and see if they work and then maybe take them out or maybe not. But we don't have to commit the money to the budget right up front. We can try things out before we, you know.
And I know I said this last time, but if our budget's 35 million, say, it costs 38 to run it, as you see it. So we're bringing in revenue through grants, tuitions, outside grants, through private grants, $3 million that we're using each year. So it's not like, you know, we try to approach it as state money, town money, what else we can generate from revenue, and then that's the real cost. Now I understand that that insurance is not part of our budget, I get that. And that's a cost that gets charged back to us through Schedule 19, the end of the year report. We understand that. But it does take more than what is allocated. And I think, Gus, to your point, I mean, there's a few things that need to happen that really can't be solved this evening, but they're worth talking about. One is the Chapter 70 formula has to be fixed, and they're talking about doing that. $2 billion to get it the way the committee recommended. So that's not happening tomorrow.
And will that happen indeed, actually, to the extent it needs
I
to
mean,
happen for
it
suburban
could, but it'll
schools?
take a few years, right? It's not
Because
gonna
that's
happen.
gonna be tough.
Happen overnight. I think in communities like this, you know, we get hurt because so much of it is on the taxpayer. So is there a way that revenue can increase on the town side? I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. But I mean, that's something that could happen where, you know, we're going beyond a couple of restaurants and pizza places that generate revenue. I don't know. But that can't happen today, and it can't happen for FY19. But that's a solution that other places have done. Westwood has done a great job with that. I mean, millions come in just for that area in Westwood that, you know, they don't even notice. It's on the outskirts of town, and they're getting millions of dollars of revenue there. Maybe that isn't what Medfield wants to do. I don't know. I'm just saying that there's got to be ways that, or an override. So you got override, you got state money, and you got revenue increases. I mean, those are the only real three ways that you can do something about this, because it's still it's still going up each year. You know.
Just on the enrollment point, Pete, I don't like enrollment projections. I don't think they're that reliable. And the proof of the pudding this year was that our enrollment ended up being substantially higher than the professionals projected it would be. So it's 2633, which is back to about FY15 levels. But the projection from the professionals, not taking into account whatever we do at Hospital Hill or any other new building, is that we'll get back to about FY13 or 14 enrollment numbers by FY21. So you know, a lot of that has to do with property values. As you know, it's an accepted fact that the ratio of births to kindergarten in Medfield is the highest in the state, because people are generally born somewhere else and then they move here around kindergarten age, kindergarten or first grade, right? And so, you know, that.
What are the enrollments in kindergarten, first grade?
The enrollments currently, in FY18, there are 70 no, that's pre-kindergarten.
That's
175 kindergartners and 195 first graders. We had, the experts had predicted 183 first graders.
Because it got as low as like 165 one year.
How many in grade 12?
In grade 12 this year, 230.
And those were up around 275, maybe
Yeah.
10 years ago.
Yeah. And they have us within 10 years being back up to 3,000 total.
Actually, in FY10, our 12th grade enrollment was 212. And this year's 230. Our
just
kindergarten
wondering.
enrollment was 204. This year it's 175. And the first grade enrollment was 190. This year 175. So, you know, that I think we're getting back to the sort of the same levels we were at in rough numbers then at that time.
I'll be fascinated to see what the census numbers are in 2020 as well, in terms of what our percentage of children or households with children under 18 are. Because I know that in 2010, it was close to 50. This is not something that's a surprise to anyone. But in that scenario, as taxpayers, we do have to carry a heavier load of kids with fewer resources outside. But it also indicates that we also have to
I
devote.
can't hear her. Would you please speak louder?
Sure.
Do you folks, I'm sorry, you done?
No, I'm just
Go
saying that I think it's important for us, as we are realizing and understanding as a town, that we need to be thinking about financial futures. And that we do kind of spend a lot of time going, gosh, I would love to spend money on that right now. I know it would make things better in the future, but we just can't afford it this year. That we are going to be looking, I think, at larger populations of children for a while. And if we aren't really thinking about how we put those systems into place now, then we are going to be behind the 8 ball. And we will keep on coming back. That's just,
So Jessica, I have to play, and I'm playing devil's advocate, so I'm
no, it's
deliberately
because
yanking
Gus,
your
I like to
chain,
entertain
okay?
you this way.
over the years that the student enrollment went down, and I was on the warrant committee at the time, and the school budget kept going up. Every year I'd say, well, and then the argument is always, well, just because it went down, it's semi-fixed cost, you really can't just use the average cost and expect the budget to go down. Every year I was told that. I said, well, that's great, as long as when the student population starts going back up, we see the same thing, that you don't really need to change the budget that much because of all these semi-fixed costs. So I hear you. I think when I moved here in 1995, Medfield had the highest percentage in the entire state of residents that were under 18. So we've been there before.
Yeah.
And I am yanking your chain. I'm interested in the pressure more than trying to make the firm point. But we've been there before, and we've figured out how to do a lot of this. I know things change, and you can't just go back to where you were. But actually, we've dealt with this before, and it's not automatic just because the population goes up that all of a sudden we have to go to a new deck of
I would
cards.
posit that we neglected a lot of this before.
If we
And it's a reality that
neglected,
we have to manage within our budget constraints, and I still think that there are areas in which we are neglecting. But-
if you have a school system that performs as long as this one has, I hope we can maintain that level of neglect. Not for the neglect's sake, but for the performance sake. And incidentally, all my comments here, I talked to Anna Mae this morning, none of what I'm saying here in any way at all reflects or suggests any disrespect or disregard for all of you on the school committee, certainly for Dr. Marsden and the staff. This is not an issue of performance. My argument is an affordability of the taxpayers. I hear the arguments about the school, and it's not intended to suggest anything negative about the kind of performance you're doing, just to be clear.
And I also understand the burden in terms of tax. I mean, I think each of us in this room feel that and are making that judgment for themselves about whether that's something they can manage. And again, perhaps it is important then that we bring that to the town, that we have to think about how the town prioritizes that.
And I think one of the challenges here on both sides of this point is that the people on both ends of the spectrum who get most hurt are the people at the margins, right? And so for the programs in the schools, the kids who get most hurt by a change in a program, a change in class size, are the kids at the margins, right? For the most part, most kids will be fine. For the most part, most taxpayers will be fine, right? If you look at the average demographics in Medfield, the number of taxpayers who will be really hurt by these kinds of increases is not a huge number. I don't know, it's probably larger than we think it is, but it's not a huge number. But you're still talking about people, whether they're kids in the schools, whether they're taxpayers at the margins, who are going to be affected. Because there are people, and it's not just seniors. I mean, there are parents who move here who are, working 3 jobs between the couple to be here, to have their kids in the schools. And if they're looking at $1,000 tax increase going forward, that's real money to them. And so, and it's unfortunate, and I'm going to channel Mike Sullivan and complain about the state for a minute, but I mean, it's unfortunate that we are so limited in our means of raising revenue, and that we are really limited to the most regressive form of taxation available. And so, but that sort of kind of is what it is. But I think that's one of the things that makes these decisions so wrenching, because you are looking at people who have been here a long time, or people who are really working hard to stay here, and look at these dollars and say, well, for other people, it's it's $600, you don't even notice, right? Some people, you really notice. And the same thing is true for kids who would benefit from a program that might be cut, or benefit from a staff member who might be lost. It's the kids who are at the margins, who are having a harder time, who are going to be most harmed by it. I have no solution, but I'm just noting that as part of the issue, so.
Can I just say, Gus, when you were chairman of the warrant committee, you were there when we supported the last override. I believe you were chair at the time. And we did have that very conversation. I remember it. And you, I hope, remember that in the years after that override, we were continuing to cut positions. That's part of the reason where we are today with terms of class sizes. Every year we were cutting at least one elementary position to keep our budget. Those first few years after that override were at 2%. They were all under 4%. It was a much bigger override, which enabled us to do that. But that also came, and it will with this as well. It came with the elimination of positions over time as enrollment went down. So I don't want to I don't want to have anybody who wasn't in on the conversations we're having to believe that we haven't been cutting positions, because we have been regularly reducing elementary teaching positions as enrollment was going down, and now that we see that trend reversing, at some point you do need to put some of those back.
It's interesting you bring that up. I actually went through the information for the Warrant Committee. What I did is I looked going back to FY10, and I did two things. One, I did a cumulative 2.5% increase from FY10 all the way up, and there's certain years that even then you were below 2.5. And then I said, that's not really the right way to look at it. You ought to do it year by year. And the thing that was interesting is when you do it that way, so in other words, you use last year as the stake in the ground for 2.5% increase the following year. And I just looked at how many years was the school committee below 2.5, how many was it above. And one of the things that was interesting is doing it that way, what the sequence showed was for the past 5 years, it's always been above. Actually, 6 years back, it was below. So part of the pain is that for 5 years straight, virtually, I think, Mike Sullivan can back me on this, but I think we've almost walked into every budget cycle with the assumption that the Prop 2.5 growth pool virtually all goes to schools. And that's our starting point for figuring out how to handle the budget, so.
And that's what I mean when I say we have a structural problem, because, you know, those 3 years you're talking about where we're under, we're after close to $1 million override that was just for the school.
I think it was a $500,000 override.
I thought it was
if I
900.
recall.
Your memory may
check
be
the
better,
records.
but I know it was all for, none of it was for positions. It was all for one-time expense.
Right.
So what we're proposing this year is, I think, about 120 or 140,000 of one-time expense. That was 500. If it was 500,000, your memory's almost certainly better.
What happened, Bob McGuire asked for that in the first year was to buy the equipment, but he said it's because there were some staffing plans following. So he asked for a year early
Right.
to get the capital, but then because the override gave him the money that he needed for
Right, and
the
a
longer
substantial
term stuff.
part of what
Yeah.
we're doing this year, a much lower part, but part of what we're doing in our 6.16% budget this year is the same thing, to try to put in the one-time expense that will give you the ability, and it's not an expense that's not needed, just like what we needed those computers now. The one-time expense we're looking at here is, you know, we have over the past 3 years budgeted about $50,000 a year for school security upgrades. We think there's still about 120 or 130,000 that needs to be done, and we frankly think there's some urgency to doing it. Whether that's just a perception or not, I'd hate to be here a year from now and saying, wish I'd spent that 120,000. Certainly, it may be more responsible to do it over 3 years, but I mean, with the safety of our kids and the environment we live in, real or perceived, I don't care. That's why we're committed to that.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I just have a question. This always enters my mind when we start talking about past history in terms of budgets. So what was the conversation around here when we were doing like override after override after override after override after override? Like, what were those conversations like? Because now this is the first one we proposed in years, and there was a time where I look back at the school budgets where it's 7% increase, 9% increase, 6 point something. I mean, big increases every year. So what were those conversations like? I wasn't here, so I don't know. It seemed like if we're talking about 4% and being over 2.5%, that's all well and good, but if you have successive years of 7 and 8 and 9% increases, it makes life a lot easier those years after that, where you can afford a 3% or a 2% of those kinds of. We haven't had that luxury in the last 7 years. So what were those conversations like? I don't know.
So those conversations took place before I hit the Warrant Committee. There was only one override when I was on the Warrant Committee, and that was, I think it was the second year. I was not the chair. I think it was the second year. Pete?
I was going to ask Mike, actually. My memory is that.
I think you can't go any further than Mr. Sullivan.
So you want a little bit of ancient history? You know, it was not pleasant. People were not happy. Obviously, you know, when you get those increases year after year.
Big increases.
And that's how we ended up with a $10,800 average tax bill. I think because the town has, and I include the schools when I say the town,
Right.
has operated on the lean side, we were able to do a lot of, accommodate a lot of changes within that. For example, We had a call fire department at the time. We didn't have a full-time fire department. We had part-time, and we still do to a great extent, part-time building inspectors. We've had to do a lot of things that to try to keep expenses down, and I think the town's been very cooperative even now. I mean, I think one of the best things we did was when the school department moved into the town hall, because it promoted a lot of
Because you
cooperation.
got rent money?
That helped, yes. We're gonna raise it. If you get a 6% budget increase, up you go. 6% rent increase. But, you know, the last few years, we've consolidated our information technology departments, and that's proved beneficial to all sides. Now we're in the middle of a facilities consolidation, and that's proving very effective. And one of the problems we have right now is there are so many, I said to somebody, I think everybody thinks we're out of the recession. And the country may be out of the recession, but Medfield sure isn't. I just want to give you some of the issues that are coming up at town meeting this year, many of which involve the school department, many of which involve other departments, but they're all very costly, and this is what's creating some of the problems. In fact, our revenues are not up 2.5%. They're up about 2.3%. Our budget is up 9.1%. Much of that is due to capital projects, but it's also health insurance cost, unemployment insurance cost, pension costs, and a lot of these other factors. But we have, just for building projects, we have the Dale Street feasibility study, that's $1 million. We have the Park and Recreation Facility, they're asking for $100,000 to begin planning on a building that will probably cost $8 to $10 million. Council on Aging would like to expand their center to provide respite and help provide respite care. The Water and Sewer Department, which is meeting here later with the board tonight, is looking to continue design of an iron manganese treatment facility for our water wells. That's probably going to be somewhere in the $8 million range. Just to paint the Mount Nebo water tower and repair that is $1.1 million. There was a request for a drug and alcohol prevention coordinator. Medfield State Hospital issue is before us this year. We have health insurance increases of 9.1%, pension increases of 9.1%, unemployment insurance increases of 67%. And we have 5 articles in the town meeting warrant for addressing the senior housing concerns. Seniors feel that they're being driven out of the town by a variety of factors. There is concern, I hear it expressed often, that very frequently people come to Medfield to educate their children, and then when the kids are out of school, bang, the house is on the market and they're out of here. And the people that have stayed here are paying over and over again to educate somebody else's kids when the house is sold to a family with more children. So it is a problem. We have the 40B housing issue that we have to deal with. And as many of you who have been to hearings this year have attested to, it's not always a pleasant situation to be on one of those committees getting beaten up by the neighbors because they don't want the project in the neighborhood. Well, let me tell you, in Boston, there is a concerted effort to put more housing in the suburbs. The governor is supporting 125,000 housing units by 2025, most of which will go in the suburbs. The Metropolitan Area Planning Council is telling us we need 430,000 housing units by 2030 in eastern Massachusetts. Now, if we think we have problems with funding education now, imagine what you do when you get 430 housing units. I, for one, hope Amazon stays out west and doesn't come anywhere near Massachusetts because they plan on bringing 50,000 employees, Imagine the housing crisis that's going to create. So we have all these problems that we're trying to address. Unfortunately, so many of them coming up this year, and they're going to bring future costs. For example, the Dale Street School, they're talking about a $50 million cost, and that will be about $30 million of that paid for by the taxpayers of Medfield. When that money's borrowed, that will add $3 million to the debt service. Now, fortunately, we're dropping probably about $1.5 million when we pay off the other school projects, but you're still picking up $3 million, and that's.
We've been in an excellent debt position for a long time, right? Like, I mean, that's been part of the argument that's been made to us at town meeting for supporting the public works building and the police department, is that our debt position is very strong.
It is dropping. We've dropped way down, and but it's still about $6.5 million a year principal and interest payment. So it's good that we're doing it. It helps, it keeps our bond rating because it shows that we are maintaining our infrastructure, but it also drives up the tax rate. And the problem is, it's not just the schools that's an issue, it's the entire town has these problems that we're facing. And I don't know how we address them, because they tell us we're not on a major road, we don't have public transit, we're too difficult for people to get to work, so companies don't want to locate here. I was talking to, and a point that Jeff made earlier, the town of Westwood, I believe, gets $5 million a year out of Westwood Station. Now, we could do one heck of a lot with $5 million a year, but we're not going to get it because we're not on 128, we're not on Route 1, we're not on Route 95, and we don't have big industrial parks. So we have to live within our means, and I think it requires that we distinguish wants and needs. And I think we need to look very carefully at what our needs are. For example, in the past couple of years, we've repaired the boilers at the Wheelock School. That was about $400,000, I believe. We built the track and field. That was $1.7 million. This year, we have $450,000 that we've accumulated in interest from school building assistance reimbursement that we're proposing to do roof repairs at the junior high school, I believe it is, repair the portico where the kids at the high school get dropped off on their buses, and do boiler repairs at the high school and middle school. In consolidating our facilities report, we did, our new facilities manager did an excellent job preparing a 20-year capital plan for buildings in the town, all buildings. A majority of those projects for the first several years are going to be school projects. And he came up with a proposal of about $42 million. Now, it may be a little bit on the high side because it includes work at the Dale Street School, and some of the work should be done as maintenance items, but it's a big chunk of money. And those things have to be done because, as you all know as homeowners, if you don't take care of your house, it gets more expensive, and it's a lot more expensive to rebuild your house than it is to repair it. So we have to keep up with the maintenance of our buildings, and that's a need. I don't know how far we can stretch all these things. And the other concern I hear is, well, if all the people whose children are out of school move out of town, they'll sell their houses to people with kids, and our enrollment will continue to increase even faster. So we do have a structural problem. We do have a problem that we have to be more careful than many of the other communities that have the resources that we don't have to invest in their schools, to invest in their communities. We have to continue to be cautious in our spending patterns.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to suggest that we will, do you want to?
Yeah, actually, I know as a resident newcomer to both school committee and town politics and relatively to the town, and spending the last 7 weeks talking to what feels like just about everybody in town as part of the election process, I've heard a lot about, the tax burden on, our senior population. And, and I wonder, what is the plan to address the senior housing in town? And I heard a list of the problems that we're going to face, but I've yet to hear the proactive stance that we're going to take, except maybe, you know, let the class sizes get a bit larger so our schools are less attractive and maybe people move to town. Or what are we doing about applying for senior housing, more 55 and over communities in the town, so that people who love this town can stay here while supporting the schools? Because in order for a balanced community to exist, including a good solid education, we have to have seniors as part of the community in order for that to work. And I hear, you know, there's a new 55 and over community in Walpole, Millis, Norfolk has already jumped on, and I'm guessing a large population of the people living there are former Medfield residents. So I'm wondering where Medfield is on that stance, so that, you know, the schools can be aware and support that in the long run with our voters. While I still have to obviously maintain that we need, you know, to maintain the programming in our schools. So that's my.
So I can refer you to about 20 hours of YouTube videos or more, or you can just sit down with Massaro and he can talk to you for 20 hours. So, I mean, obviously the promotion of senior housing has been a big focus for the Board of Selectmen, for the Senior Housing Study Committee, for the Affordable Housing Trust. And I think we recognize that that's an unmet need. Sort of in our housing production plan, we identify senior housing as one of the key components of what we need to do actively grow, because it's not the most, Medfield in a lot of ways is a more attractive community than some of those other communities, particularly for families, and so developers want to go where the biggest profit is. We don't have a lot of huge tracts of land, except for the hospital, which we'll talk about on Thursday. Come back and we're going to solve that problem on Thursday. So that's a Thursday solution. So,
Medfield Station.
so it's a fair point. I think this is something that a lot of effort has gone into over the last few years to address, and I think it's. I'm hoping we'll make some progress in 2018. We made some progress in the past couple of years, and I'm hopeful we'll make more progress this year. But it's something we need to do.
Could I have a point?
Sure.
Unless you want to add the point, Barbara. There is a senior housing survey that's going to be going out. It's actually going out the week before the town meeting. The response period is 2 weeks. So the week before, it'll be advertised at the town meeting. The week after, it's intended to build on the survey that Tony Santori kind of shepherded through last year. This is intending to get a more definitive handle on how many seniors want what kind of housing, at what price points, over what period of time, so that we can actually begin to think about this in a more rigorous way than we have in the past. So stay tuned. I think that July may be about the time that the results of the survey would become available, which should be plenty of time for us to take action relative to what's going on.
I guess my one last comment is, you know, Medfield is a great town, and families are going to move in. And I don't know how we would deter them, Mike, from coming in with families. You know, we've built houses with 3 or 4 bedrooms in them, and so, you know, empty nesters aren't moving into the 4-bedroom house. So.
Although I would encourage a guest room policy.
So I'm gonna suggest, I mean, I think that, I mean, that's been true for 40 years, and
Sure.
it would probably be true for another 40 years. I'll suggest, as we're getting to 8 o'clock, that we sort of wrap up that portion of the discussion. The one last thing, just to the extent anyone on the school committee has comments on the fiscal and capital policies. I know I've gotten comments from Jessica and Chris. If you have further comments or things you want to discuss, we can discuss that now. Otherwise, I think with respect to these issues, we should sort of take them back to our respective boards and committees. We have 20 days until town meeting, 20 days until the first night of town meeting.
So get those sitters for 2 nights.
I'm Tom Sweeney, I was just reelected to the Board of Assessors. The Board of Assessors are very concerned about the situation, both sides. With the foreign community, I know they're very much because you know something? It's not the taxes, it's the growth in town, because that creates taxes of growth. So that, if you don't have the growth, you're gonna get nothing. And what you do, you extend the debt. Okay, you're gonna pay for it down the road, but you're gonna pay it dearly, because along with growth in the bond list is interest. And the interest comes up in the first year, and you gotta pay it. The bond company doesn't wait, you pay it up front. I think I discussed this with Mike, and I know the last time that was the situation too. So be prepared for a good increase if this goes through and is voted upon at the ballot box. Because I think we should bring it up. I'm the grandfather of the dark man over here, man who's talking there. But, you know, these are things that people don't understand. And that's what you're gonna run up to when you go to town meeting. It's gonna be the tax bill, not the rate. The rate means nothing. It's the bill that comes in the mail. And I'm in it, I'm the Board of Assessors. And every time the bill comes in, my wife says to me, "What's this?" You know, another $300 or $400 or $500. Since I've been in town, I've been in the same house for 50 years. I was born in the town in 1938. I've been measured with my grandfather. I saw a tax bill, and my granddaughter had 12-acre farm, house, chicken coops, barn. I don't think he hit $300. But they had a good school system. My mother went to school here. She went to 15, she graduated, went on to Burdett College. Came back to here, was no jobs, depression. She went to work at the state hospital as a telephone operator. My father came to town, they married. That's where I came from. This is important, because you've got to understand the taxpayer. And it's not only the old guy like me, it's the young kid. He's got the 3 kids. Remember that. You've got 3 kids, and you're gonna have to pay the big bill. And if you don't have the growth, it goes override and extends your debt. Well, that's all I have to say, but I'm not advocating either way, I'm just trying to educate people. I challenge Mike all the time, and he's really good. And I challenge you guys too, the selectmen. I've never challenged a school committee. I did in the old days.
We welcome you. Come on in.
No, I think it's good. I think people in the community should challenge you to come up with some solutions, not extend the debt. We all love kids. I had my kids go through the school system. One kid didn't have a science book until he was 3/4 of the way through the year. He borrowed some kid's science book and do the work. He's got a great job today. You know, travels the world. You don't have to go to MIT or Harvard or anywhere. You know, with the state universities.
No, your point's a good one. I mean, when the home values go up, then the tax bills also go up because it's a rate.
That's right.
Right, but by the same token, at least speaking only for myself, my biggest investment is my home. And at least according to Zillow, since 2011, home values in Medfield on average have gone up about $200,000. That's better than I would do if I had any money to put in the market, which I don't. So I'm not crying poverty, but you know that's part of it. Is that despite the fact that we don't live on a public road, a major thoroughfare, we don't have great public transportation. People do want to live here, and that does help all of us in terms of if we're homeowners with our investments.
My income's gone the other way. It's not fixed, it goes down.
Right, but if your home is an investment, then the value of that is gone up.
It is,
Right.
right. But that can change. You remember the recession?
It
There were
can
properties
change.
in the town of Medfield that never caught up
Right.
to the recession, especially when they were over. I know that, and every time, I'm an appraiser also, and some people will call me and say, "Tom, what's my value of my house?" I go in and I start looking. What the value is now and what's gonna be now. And I'm afraid to tell them. That's what it was in the past. But that doesn't say, we got this trade war hovering here, a lot of things happening, and real estate values go down just as quickly as they've gone up. And I mean, look at the stock market's doing right now. Who the hell knows what we're gonna be? But that's what we're just trying to say. The assessors all agree on this. And, I mean, we look at this thing constantly about money and how people are gonna pay for things, interest rates. We have to talk to the treasurer on the bond ratings and the bonds which you're gonna pay for. And that, you don't know that because once you vote the money, I can tell you, they're gonna go out then. And that changes.
Thanks, Tom. I'm gonna suggest that we'll end the,
I just have a question for Mike.
okay,
The
last
fall-
question,
Yeah, no,
and then we'll
this is
adjourn the
really-
joint meeting.
So Mike, you said under Article 11, the tax levy's going up by about 2.9%?
Yeah, that'd be the 2.5% that we're allowed under Proposition 2.5 plus new growth.
Plus new growth. So what is for each of the other scenarios, do you know what the percentage is? I mean, I don't see that number here, and it may be that I don't know how to do the math to find it, but.
For what percent, I'm sorry. could
So
you repeat
for scenario 1, which I believe is the Warrant Committee's recommendation, that's still going to require an override. What would the increase in tax bills be inclusive of the 2.9% to get to there?
$10,000 bill.
I believe that would be a $500,000 override, so that would be probably about another 20 cents on the tax rate, because we're $2.5 billion in valuation. So a dollar on the tax
Now
rate
you're just throwing numbers at me, Mike.
raises 2.5 million, yeah. So I would say there's a chart that,
I have the chart up.
you have the chart?
Probably a
Yes, right here.
$500,000 override on the average tax bill's the impact of the override's 120. On the entire tax bill, it's 363.
Okay, what about for the other two scenarios, right?
There's a chart right
So it's
there.
120 above.
There's a chart.
Above the
baseline
right,
One way to
of
think about it,
Article
Chris,
11.
is that for $1 million, it's $245. So under scenario 3, it's a $1.2 million override. And so it's 1.2 times 245.
You know, I was told there'd be no math.
And you shouldn't have asked the mathematical question.
1.2
If you start at the base,
Take a look at that chart.
if you start at
Take
the
a look at that
base,
chart.
I don't
if
have
you start at the base of the balanced budget, the average impact on a tax bill is $300. That's 2.79%, okay? Then for every $250,000 worth of override, it's another $61.
Okay.
So then you can do the math.
What's the assumption
that.
of the house value for that amount?
10,800.
Well,
No,
the average.
$680,000 assessed value.
There you go.
Thank you.
Oh, the tax bill, I'm sorry. Right.
Yeah,
The tax bill, 10,000.
right.
yeah.
Okay, so under the school committee's proposed budget, you're looking at about, if I'm right, about $300 more than under the regular 2.5 plus new growth?
Sounds about right.
Big one?
I said that sounds about right.
Okay.
Because,
So the average tax bill will go up about 600 instead of 290. I mean, if I'm going to support a tax increase, I'm just trying to figure out what that number is, that's all. I'm not trying to advocate anything, I just want to know.
well, yeah, so it's, this one. Yeah, it's about $600 on average.
This would be about 1.25.
Right,
We're about
yes,
700, and
yes.
town's about 500.
Yeah,
So for every $1 million, it's $245
that's correct.
of an override. So half of it's 120.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? All right, I will suggest that we'll adjourn the joint meeting. Do we have a motion over here to adjourn?
Second.
Do you want to vote on the capital stabilization piece?
No,
Okay.
I don't think we're in agreement on it yet, so I don't think we're in a position to vote on it.
Just with respect to, we didn't talk about that, but the school committee supports it as we think, again, appropriate long-term planning for capital plans.
And the selectmen are still talking about it.
I move adjournment to the school committee.
Great, all right, thank you very much. All right, we'll move on. Phil Harvey here. Phil Harvey, Water and Sewer Board.
Feel free to stay as long as you want.
Moving over there.
Thanks for the water, by the way.
It's coming out of next year's budget.
There's a kitty.
Deducted that from the rent this month. We're good.
He's also selling Medfield water.
Yeah, it's okay.
So which well, 6? Okay. Exactly. Now with extra minerals.
Supplements, that's right. Is this the mic issue? Yeah? Okay.
Mr. Harvey, what do you have for us?
You called the meeting.
How much money are you looking for?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the invitation. I think this is my first participation in a selectmen meeting leading up to the town meeting. Maybe one thing I just wanted to remind people in the audience that the water and sewer as provided by the town is regulated fiscally through its own enterprise funds, so that debt and operating costs are only borne by those who actually pay for the services. So roughly about, I don't have exact, pardon me? Okay, I'll just turn this way. So roughly about 93% of the homes in Medfield get water sewer services from us, and about 85% get sewer services from us. So the costs that are borne from delivering those services are not part of the rate base from the general fund. They're segregated, as you might call it that. We do use the town's bond rating capability, but it's the ability of the residents to pay for those bills, and that we manage the enterprise funds in a fiscally sound way that the bond issuers do look at. So so I just wanted to just sort of maybe separate myself a little bit, or the town water and sewer budgets and our programs a little bit from what happens within the general fund and other services that are part of the tax base.
Who do you represent?
My name's Bill Harvey. I'm chairman of the Board of Water and Sewerage. It's an appointed position. I've been a board member for about 6 or 7 years, and I took over chairmanship 2017. We have two other board members, Jeremy Marset and
Christian.
right, and Christian Carpenter. Jeremy was a chairman for a number of years, and we decided that, well, he decided he wanted to do some more, emphasize some other things, and so I was volunteered to be the
Great man.
yeah, sort of. So I've been a town resident for about 9 years. I got involved when my wife wanted to know what was in the water, and I said, well, I don't know, I just got here. She goes, well, go find out. So I asked a couple of questions, and someone said, you sound like you know what you're doing about water, and so I'm involved. I've been in the water industry for about 31 years. So
So do you want to go over the warrant articles that you have?
Sure. So I think the germane articles are about.
If anyone wants to move closer, feel free. We're sort of set up.
That would be fun. Yeah, come on
feel free to
in.
bring your chairs closer if you'd like.
I had dinner. I'm not going to bite. I'm not that hungry.
Except for Bill can stay in the back.
Too close to me.
That's fine. That's fine.
That's far enough down.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So some of the primary articles. Article 34 is about the investigation of a treatment plant to reduce iron and manganese from our existing water resources. The second is the refurbishment of the Mount Nebo tank. The third article is about basically authorizing the board to promulgate rules and regulations for the operation of the system itself, and also to be able to enforce those rules and regulations through the use of penalties of people that are, if they don't follow the rules and regulations. So that's more of a sort of a legal, maybe not a legal thing, but something that our council thought that we should have in place, because it's not explicitly written, although it's been implicitly in practice
for, I would say, for a number of years since I've been a board member. So this is maybe just sort of cleaning up the role of the board as well as the Department of, the DPW director and any designee that is tasked with creating rules and regulations. So some of these might be how the water is used or when, or service level that's required. Others would be just strictly just costs to do certain things for connections and the like. As well as mechanical and other technical specifications, how big the pipe should be, the definition of title of infrastructure between the town and the homeowner and the like. So in the last 6 months, we've actually created a regulations for the water side. We are moving on to the sewer side, so it's a lot, it's a readable document that can be downloaded and people understand what sort of services are that the town provides, what are the rules and regulations around the use of that, and then what are the schedule of costs for certain services, and lastly, for those who don't follow the rules and regulations, what are the defined fines for that? So that's the third article. Let me address maybe I'm not going to say.
Any
Yeah.
questions, Gus or Pete, on that article?
No, I was looking for it, just to make sure because it wasn't on that.
Okay, yeah, that was Article 39.
39.
Yeah.
I don't.
Pete, any questions? Okay, so you want to talk about Article 34? Or 35, in either order?
Let me talk about 35 first. So Mount Nebo is one of our 2 water tanks. We've had plans to repaint and repair some of the outside as well as internal components for several years. What prevented us from doing that is that we needed to replace the tank that was at the state hospital, which was a tank which, I'll be careful with how I define this, was a tank that which we were the beneficiary of, and we used and utilized its pressure, but it was a state-owned tank, and it was on state-owned property. So we could not actually, we couldn't do anything to it, really, anything major to it without an act of, frankly, the act of governor, probably most likely, if we had to do something to that tank. So it became obvious to us that as part of our master plan, we had to deal with that tank. So we replaced that tank a couple of years ago, and that had to be done first. Now that we have that tank, we're able to do maintenance on Nebo, and what that means is during times of light water, a season of moderate water demand, that we'll drain the Nebo tank and finish our inspections and then figure out what has to be rehabilitated and do that sort of work and then bring it back online. So right now we have a line item, a budget of about $1.1 million. We've been carrying that through our master plan for the better part of about 5 years. We have an initial estimate for work that has to be done on the outside, but we still have yet to drain the tank and look on the inside. It's not as easy as throwing a guy in a scuba tank and have him do an assessment with an underwater iPad. No, we have to drain the tank and probably have to do a couple of metallurgical tests to see if we have to sandblast and repaint and recondition, as well as there are some internal components that may be replaced just because they're old, but there's actually 1 or 2 components which are not operating optimally, and they are under warranty from the original manufacturer, so we're going to have that work done when this is done. So the schedule of that is most likely an inspection in the fall when the high demand breaks, and that's when we will lower the tank, and then that's when we will figure out the true cost of this project. With what we know, it's about a $600,000 project to paint the outside as well as some of the other things that can be seen on the outside. It's really how much more than the $600,000 estimate if it rolls back up to that about the $1.1 million placeholder or not, or maybe we'll look out and it'll be less than that. So we see that as being an inspection and an assessment September, October-ish, engineering and going out to procurement in the winter, and then hopefully we will be able to get this work done as soon as the weather in the spring, and I'm calling this spring, allows us to do painting. You have to be careful, what time of year you can do painting. You don't want it to be too hot or too cold. So we will still be in fiscal year 2019, which will be probably, if I had to guess, May of 2020, when the NEBO project will be completed. So that's one of the warrant articles. Any questions on that?
May of 20 to complete it?
I think that's probably when it's, let me see, no. What year are we in now, Mike?
18.
18, so it's 19, I'm sorry, 19. Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah. Anything with numbers, I ask Mike, so, yeah.
I'm just trying to track the technical side of this, because Mo has come and explained this to us in the past. You're taking the water down in the fall, that will give you the access to the inside of the tank to know whether or
Correct.
not you have to paint it.
Correct.
But you won't paint it till the spring.
Most
So
likely
you'll take it down
not.
a second time, or do you leave it?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. It's a little bit of a timing thing, because until we assess it and our engineer help us understand the trade-offs of some of the work, and then we actually go out to bid, well, we can't imagine that there'll be someone ready and waiting to do this work for us before the snow hits. And then it just becomes just impossible to do a good paint job.
And then the internal, Mo mentioned there's I'm not sure if it's a mixing blade or there's
Yes.
the apparatus at the bottom of the tank.
Yes.
Does your decision on whether or not to fix that apparatus hinge on whether you need to paint the inside of the tank, or?
No, not at all. No, we're going to fix that. That's the part that's under warranty.
Yeah.
It was something that wasn't
So you don't have to
either
drain-
designed or installed correctly, but either way, it's not performing to what it's supposed to be doing. We're going to be doing that when the tank is painted. We have to drain the tank anyhow when you paint it.
Okay.
We're not going to, we can't paint the tank when you have water in it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so we got to drain the tank anyhow, so.
Okay.
yeah.
And there's no, and it really is, I'm sitting there saying, if you take all the water out of the tank once.
Yeah, so this will be
Intuitively,
a
it
double,
would
this
say-
will be a double drain, so to
Well,
speak, yeah.
Intuitively, it would seem that you do the outside and the inside at the same time, because you get the tank drained. But it sounds like the cost, the incremental cost of the inside, if you don't need to do it right away, it would be better to delay that to some point in the future when you do need to do the inside and drain it again than to just get the whole thing done.
It's interesting point, but we don't really have enough information to sort of outfox ourselves of, balancing economy of scale with a single contractor versus, you'll have, XYZ company in September, and then he's not available, and then you've got to go to, ABC company in the spring, and then you're dealing with two different warranties, and yeah, I think it would be a little bit, and also just for our engineer to administrate that, I think, just more contracts and terms and things like that. So it is a project, but this is someone's business, is to go around and rehabilitate tanks, every 15 or 20 years or something like this. So we feel confident that we'll have a reasonable pool of vendors who will be able to do this and do it all in one shot.
Okay.
And furthermore, the fact that if we do our assessment, it's September, October-ish, we have several months to go out and find the right company and get us in the schedule.
I think my question was the inside, when you do the assessment on the inside, if it doesn't need it, then you're gonna do the outside paint and you're gonna replace the
Yes,
equipment, and then
yes.
you're done until you probably have to do it again with the outside. What I was getting at is, then do you have a problem in 5 years that's just the inside of the tank?
We don't think so.
Okay.
We don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not gonna, if we have a problem in 5 years after we do all this work, then I think we would probably have some other warranty claim.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
mixing valve, does that make it better quality water?
No.
Chemicals?
No. It's intended to create, just gentle mixing so you don't get static zones, so that you're not just turning over one part of the tank. What tends to happen is that when you add a small amount of chlorine
Right.
to make sure biology doesn't grow, and when it gets to your home, that you don't have any, biology that grows along the way. What we try to do is make sure that the tank is mixed so that you're just not sipping from the top or sipping from the bottom and you get a dead zone.
That's
So-
what we get from the old tank, the chlorine. I remember that.
Well,
You'd get up in the morning.
Chlorine can be
Yeah.
good because that means, it's working, right?
I like it.
But it has, people have different opinions about aesthetics, but technically speaking, to control microbiological growth, we do employ a small level of chlorine to do that. And it's, in my experience, it's actually quite a low level of chlorine. Where I live is probably in the tip of our service area, so people closer to it might experience more, but it is not, in my experience, a large chlorine presence compared to other towns that I've experienced. And also we have by and large a very consistent type of water when you add chlorine to sort of dial it into what it should be. It's not like the Quabbin Reservoir, which has seasonal turnover, and you have different levels of organic matter at different parts of the year. So at the NWRA, I can tell you that if you're serviced by them, the water you get in June and then the water that you get in September is going to be vastly different in its taste profile, not just in regular taste, but also its chlorine, because they're trying to catch up to all the biogrowth that's been growing, August and September. So we don't have that type of peak and valley trough that we have to deal with in microbiological control.
Okay, Article
Let me
34.
clean the lines. My problem I'm right on North Street, and it's kind of a trap area, because it doesn't come directly down to me. It's gravity, but what happens when they clean used to happen, and I can see it happen now with what you're gonna do, is that when I would get the chlorine very strong. And that would be, morning, not in the evening, but during the morning, early morning. I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm out there getting a cup of coffee because I take some pills then. But that's what I was just saying. My wife does the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the type of people who are gonna be concerned about this type of thing. I mean, it's good, I know, I
Well,
understand.
the changes that we're making is not material to the level of free chlorine that you're experiencing right now. And if you think it is elevated, then we should talk to Mo about it. And
I tell the guys all the time.
Yeah. So it's true that, from the initial point of chlorine addition is where you'll find it the strongest, and then where part of the infrastructure has the least amount of use or the farthest distance traveled, there is a decay that happens with it. Free chlorine turns into, in time, it actually turns into sodium chloride, turns into chlorine salt. So it dissipates actually into a mineral that's commonly available. Chlorine is manufactured from rock salt and a lot of electricity, and splitting it up and then recombining it later, and that's how you by and large, will create chlorine gas to create chlorine. But when you make, bleach, bleach goes bad in about 2 years, it's salt water, something like that. So in the end, chlorine does dissipate. It does turn into naturally occurring ions and salts. So
I'm mindful of Scott and Chief Hollingshead's time here, so if we could move on to Article
Sure.
34, because we're
Yep.
a little bit behind.
Okay, so in the Article 34 is about a project to treat iron and manganese deposits, which have been something of a chronic problem for 2 of our wells. The largest well is well 6. It produces greater than 50% of our water on an annual basis. During peak demands, that is running flat out, and then we sort of back it up with wells 3 and actually well 3 and not really well 4, only on certain extreme demand situations. It turns out that the water that comes from these wells is not the same. They're not even in the same water basins in the same geology. Well 6, being our largest producer, which is nice, doesn't require advanced treatment. So we have had in our capital plan for 7 years to address the quality conditions that are in well 3 and well 4. And because of the hospital tank replacement, that project was first. And Mount Nebo, we was part of a planning basis, but this project for addressing these other wells is something that's been on our mind for a while. We've gone on a sort of a mission to try to make sure, do we have any other choice but to treat for these iron and manganese levels at these wells. We've looked at 16 different parcels that were owned or have rights for water rights by the town. Our consulting engineer looked at the geology and also tried to do test wells and drill test wells in 6 of those 6 different sites. And regrettably, we could not find a site that delivered a reasonable quantity and quality of water. And it turns out that a test well that was right next to existing number 3, we sort of hit sort of like a gusher. We've always known for a long time that well number 3 had the possibility of being a high production well. It used to be a high production well, but in time, it in and of itself, its casing and other components have deteriorated in time. So what began as an investigation to filter that water and to transform it into water that's similar to well 6, we wanted to make sure, because it is going to be, I'm not going to kid you, it is going to be expensive, that we went on this pursuit through town to make sure that we exhausted all options. And it turned out that the area around well 3 can be developed to a well that's basically the same production as well number 6. It will require removal of manganese, which in trace levels is something that your body doesn't mind. At these levels here, it reaches an aesthetic threshold that the state, it exceeds the secondary limits that the state wants people to drink, so that we're going to have to treat that water. We have been working with our engineer to assess the cost for that. So this article is about 2 things. It is about, make sure I get the article here. Well, the first part is about preliminary design and permitting. There's a lot of engineering for the geology and preparing the site and doing preliminary designs. And the second part of this is actually for detailed design, to go out for them to design the building, to design the process equipment, the pipes, the valves, and redevelop the well as help us go through the whole permitting process to get this well 3, which is smaller, into a much larger well 3 site, which we'll be allowed to do because we're basically just redeveloping well number 3, but in an adjacent location. The board is, even from the first day, we are struggling with the costs of these treatment plants. I can speak for the board that we hope that the cost will come down lower than what the estimate is. But the estimate right now is about $8 million to do the plant itself. So the warrant articles are for fiscal 2019 for the preliminary design and detailed engineering, so that we can actually go out to bid for the $8 million plant. Some of this in 2018 is from both the Mount Nebo tank as well as the detailed design for this are going to come from actually a couple of other sources. One is a reappropriation from fiscal 2018, as well as for one project, and another project will be partially funded by funds. You can call it a excess or unused funds that were for the new hospital tank system.
Yeah, there's 250,000 left over from the hospital well field, so, and that can be transferred to paint Mount Nebo.
Right. So we, like I said, we are trying to find even from the beginning, we've been trying to find alternates to this, to not do the treatment, find another water source, find a cheaper way of doing this. One of the recent ideas came up is actually to get a peer review of our engineers' work, because it is a pretty big, capital project. That project itself would be we're looking at our rates and how we're going to be able to, really, how our free cash is going to be able to absorb the payment of this, and whether the system is going to be a fiscal 2020 or 2021 project, because it is kind of large, and there's been discussion about having some merit about moving it out to fiscal 21, not just to smooth the rate increase, but also give us some time to find some other alternatives.
Thanks, Bill. Pete, any questions?
No, I just, one comment, I guess, which is I've always been very impressed by the Water and Sewer Board. You're
Thanks.
the only people I know that have a 20-year capital plan before the town decided to have a 20-year capital plan. And your systems have always been very impressive in terms of how you set the rates and
Well, thank you.
the demonstrator, it's all good. So thank you.
One quick question. You said that this is both well 3 and 4 require this kind of treatment?
The strategy is that well 3, when it's redeveloped, will be comparable to the volume of well 6, and that well 4, we will maintain our permits and our permits of use, and will be strictly for emergency purposes. If one or both of those wells have problems or something like that. Well number 4 itself, instead of having elevated levels of manganese, which as a deposit in your sink will look kind of black, it actually has iron, which, as you know, looks kind of rusty. So that would actually, the same system can be used. The same system can be used to purify well number 4 as a technical concept. And if it turned out to be some sort of interim measure we had to do, that can be done. We'd have to have it permitted that way. But the strategy with 4 is to maintain our rights to that and its productivity, but to not invest in it and invest in its treatment.
So to be clear, I was trying to figure out whether this thing which is being designed is capable of treating both water from well 3 and well 4, or if we had to go to well 4, whether we'd be doing this again for well 4.
That's something that we've thought about as a board and also engineer. We haven't run that down really, but well 4 doesn't. It's not a big producer, so.
So this is a well 3 design?
This is, yeah, I mean, the short of it is, this is a well 3. So what started as a treatment plant for a small producer is actually going to become a larger treatment plant for a larger producer, which we actually need because of the growth of the town. And whether you look at the 140,000 gallons or so that, and the basic concept of some of the concepts of hospital hill development or 40Bs or whatever, we still have people moving to town. That doesn't mean that everyone's going to use it proportionately to someone who has an acre of land and waters everything, but you still have people to serve, you still have infrastructure. And also, in one extent, it can be argued that 40B projects are great where we have a larger rate base, but also a more dense population like that doesn't use water for watering and things like that proportionally as much. So it doesn't put our infrastructure at stress. We would love to sell as much water as we can. We're not profit. We're not a nonprofit. All this money goes right back into the funds. But the truth is that it turns out that when our customers want the water the most tends to be when we are limited by permits to be able to deliver that. So it'd be good to spread that around.
Could I ask a couple questions? The hospital tubular well field, that turned out to not be a productive
No.
well?
No.
Okay. Secondly, with regard to any development in town, do we have enough water to allow for the development of something like the hospital site?
Well, we just had our initial meeting with the committee in January, and we were presented with a first plan. So we haven't embedded this into our master plan for both a water use as well as wastewater service demand. So
We got
we,
130,000 to 150,000 gallons a day right now in projection.
that's right, which is, by and large, that's about 10 to, depending upon the peak, 10 to 15% additional water demand. So you could see that, we, by and large, with water resources, if you have rights to water resources, you want to maintain those rights. And by developing well number 3, it's in the best interest of the town for 3 reasons. One is that we have water resources in 2 different water basins, because one is in one water basin and one is another water basin. The second is that at least you have something of similar size and girth for peak demand, so, which we don't have a peer to well number 6, as well as we have had complaints of some aesthetic complaints with regards to iron and manganese in the past, and we want to sunset those complaints with this.
I would make a suggestion, if I might. It's not a warrant article at the moment, but I had a meeting with Mo the other day, and we talked about also, I gave him some of the numbers on the sewage wastewater requirements that are being projected up there. I would suggest that perhaps that the committee should take a look at whether the existing facilities, not necessarily the sewage treatment facilities, but the infrastructure to get from the bottom of Hospital Road to the treatment plant are sufficient to handle.
Well, that's interesting.
I don't want to cut
I just
you off.
want to get it into the.
Right.
into the
I do,
queue.
I think their contact information is, I think we have to,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
well over time on
Yeah.
this. Just
I-
for 10 seconds, John, then we got
I just
to,
wanted the figure on the article. Like, I missed the figure.
what's the number, Bill? Is it?
Not 30 million, but what they asked this year.
Yeah, do you want to?
Yeah, the painting the water tower is $1.1 million. 250,000 of that will be transferred from the unexpended bond funds from the hospital water tower. That leaves 850,000 to be bonded. Now, depending on what they find when they drain the inside of the tank and see whether that needs to be painted, the bond issue may be less than the full amount if they find they don't need to repaint the inside. But if it does need to be painted, that will be sufficient to paint the inside. So it's 1.1 million. Hopefully, we won't need all of that when we go out to bond.
That's Article 35, Mike. What's 34 to?
Article 34 is there's about $140,000 left over from the $275 that was appropriated at last year's town meeting. The request this year will be for $660,000, so for a total of $800,000 for the design and construction plans. All of that money will be transferred from Water Enterprise Fund surplus, so there'll be no bond required for that particular issue. And there is a $1.2 million in water surplus, so the $660,000 will utilize about half of that.
Tom, just real quick on the articles.
Yeah, just a quickie. And the biggest thing assessors look at is, I've heard the name, free cash, because we're limited in free cash too. Very much so, with everything that's going on. And we try to hold back. We're very conservative. We don't want to, we don't want to go to bankruptcy for it. And it's happened to towns and cities in this Commonwealth. I was involved in it. And that's where I'm concerned with this. We don't want to see it. He said it right up there. But you gotta look at these things. We know we need it, but can we phase into somewhere easier?
Yeah,
It's
believe me,
overwhelming.
yeah, no, believe me, the board is very sensitive to that. Well, the one thing you have, that needs to be appreciated is that we don't know how much revenue we're gonna get year after year. It could be wet, it could be wet years and we don't sell very much water, or it could be dry years and we sell as much as we can make. Debt is debt, and debt isn't gonna go away until the term of the loan. And we're very a project like this is gonna add, $600,000 on, on debt service on an annual basis, and we're very conscious of that. So we're trying to figure out how to value engineer this, how to, bring in, peer reviews to, I personally don't believe the $8 million figure. I still think that's high for this, and I'm coming to that with that bias.
But don't forget, your rate is based on both your sewer and your water.
Those are separate funds.
Right, but the rate, when you pay it, that's based on, see, the funds I.
Mechanically, yes, but there are two different enterprise, there are two different
I
funds.
understand that.
And the operating expenses and labor are allocated, appropriately that way. And the infrastructure and the debt is assigned to those accounts themselves.
I just have one quick, I think, I'd like to get out of the fight if we
Yep.
can. My only question is that at the end of this process with this appropriation, will we then have a pretty solid number as to what the cost would be to build the whole facility?
Yes, yes.
We'll know if that $8 million is high, we'll know what the real number is next year.
That's right.
Let's discuss, repeat, let's see if anything else. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Scott, you found us. All right, Scott McDermott in here wearing his hat as chairman of the Fire Chief Search Committee.
I wound up a chair for you.
Bottle water. Down Medfield.
Exactly. Very happy to be here after the schools and water. So another high priority item is our fire services. So I'm here just because on Thursday night, we're going to introduce you to a recommended candidate to be, our next fire chief. I just wanted to just talk a little bit about the process, how we got to here very quickly, and then turn that over for your consideration on Thursday night. So, just in terms of our committee that was formed, beyond myself, it was Dr. Jeff Marsden, Chief Robert Meany, Robert DePauli, who was the retired Needham Fire Chief, John Naff, who's our former building commissioner, Rachel Brown, who was both a citizen at large and has a lot of experience with our personnel board, Bob Conlon, who's been on our personnel board, a citizen at large, and Christine, who did her usual great job in helping us kind of steward this process forward. We first got together in June of last year, so it's been about a 10-month process. And just as I begin this, one of the things that when you do these searches, I was also involved in the search for our Medfield police chief in 2006. One of the things that is most interesting about doing this is you learn a lot about something you don't know a lot about, which for me this time was our fire services, our emergency services. And one of the things that you learn and that I wanted to acknowledge is Chief Bill Kingsbury. So, for 28 years, in that role, really an extraordinary career. When you step back as we did to look at it, as we prepared to look forward. So I think that needs to be acknowledged. Perhaps the last of a breed of public servants, public officials that will, come to this type of job in this way. He was a call fireman, born and bred in Medfield, a call fireman, and ultimately became our chief of the fire department and served for 28 years. So I wanted to acknowledge that. I also wanted to acknowledge really the highly capable and very professional and very committed members of Medfield's fire service. So we had an opportunity to be able to look at, what has been built over time, and, absolutely we're struck by capability and professionalism and the commitment of, the many members who make up our fire services. So that's something that you get a more up-close exposure to, and I'm happy to kind of be able to acknowledge that capability, professionalism, and commitment. So our first decision, actually, when we got together, was to look at timetables and to look at the context of making this decision relative to Bill Kingsbury's retirement. We made a decision that we would look to hire a interim chief that would give us the opportunity to be able to spread the search out, to be able to gather what we hoped would be the best pool of candidates, to be able to align it with the work that was being done by the ALS committee and so forth. So in doing that, we reached out through some contacts, connections. We were fortunate to be able to engage and hire interim chief Hollingshead, who's here. And that turned out to be, I think, kind of a tremendous step by the committee. One of the better decisions that we made. I have to say to the chief that you always look for. I tell this all the time, to my clients in the consulting role, is that when you start, you look for people who are hardworking and care and bring high integrity. It's hard to just turn that on in the context of an interim role. And I feel very, very fortunate that we found somebody who, from day one brought those qualities, hard work and, real caring about Medfield, coming to Medfield for the first time and kind of a real high integrity. And it was really extraordinary just to be able to have that from day one, right up through this search. Our second decision.
Scott, if I could just add a point, I'm betting that when you hired Chief Hollingshead, you didn't tell him about the volunteer hours he was going to put in on the ALS study committee. So he did a little more than just what we probably hired him for.
Yeah, or selectmen's meetings, actually. So.
That was my top too.
I negotiated a great contract.
He actually enjoys all of this. So our second decision was that we decided that we would retain a consulting firm, which was Badge Quest, and we went through some negotiations. Christine took the lead on this, to find somebody who had the experience, who was very specialized in this area, that would be professional in the way that they would help us conduct this search, and then highly networked to prospective candidates. So those were the first two things that we addressed in last summer. Then we basically spent a lot of time talking about a position description, put together a department profile. When those were rolled together, they became in the fall the position advertising that was done and the promotion of the position. And then we had we solicited candidates. We had a first round of candidates in which they were asked to present to us a cover letter describing why they would want to be Medfield's fire chief, and also a resume. We had 36 candidates who applied in that fashion. We spent a bunch of time coming up with some questions that we would ask to these candidates. We put together for these second round candidates a series of written interrogatories, some questions that we would ask them. We asked them to submit that together with a kind of a job description, together with an application, an employment application. And ultimately, we looked at and narrowed it to 13 candidates. We did a series of reference calls, and after looking at the interrogatories, the descriptions, the job applications, we narrowed it down to 8 interviews. We spent a good deal of time on February 28th and March 5th conducting those interviews, and they were very, very interested. We had a very strong pool of 8 candidates to be able to talk to that helped us, get, again, further clear definition on what we would be looking for. Following those 8 interviews and deliberations of the committee, we reduced it to 4 finalists. And we then did another round of reference calls. Both Christine and our consultant, Bob Pomeroy of Badge Quest, to do those calls for us. And then we conducted an assessment center. So an assessment center is a process to test and evaluate leadership, administration, and management skills. All 4 of our finalist candidates participated in a series of written, oral, and role-playing exercises and were evaluated by 3 independent assessors who were all former fire chiefs. And the committee had the opportunity to spend the day in the townhouse observing all of those exercises. So a very interesting day that brought a lot of opportunity for us to be able to see these candidates essentially in action and So that was, that was a great day. I think everyone on the committee enjoyed the opportunity to be able to, it's a little bit of pressure testing is one element, but, the range of administrative and fire safety and public presentation exercises, some rapid fire questions about personnel considerations that they might face in the role of being a leader and a manager, throughout the day. And then we spent another follow-up meeting then reviewing the results and the score from the assessment center. And we have chosen to put forward one candidate to the Board of Selectmen. And the recommendation that we're going to make, and the individual that you're going to be interviewing on Thursday night is the current Sandwich Fire Chief, William Carrico. And I guess he's been scheduled for a final interview or an interview by the Board of Selectmen at 7 p.m. on Thursday night. Christine has made available to you his job description, his resume, his application, and his proposal to Badge Quest.
Is that up here?
Yeah. So that, that is a process. We didn't start out with the presumption that we would be presenting to you one candidate. At the end of the day, we looked at our role as kind of narrowing as far as we thought was appropriate, and to be able to suggest to the Board of Selectmen that they should interview one, two, could have been three, and ultimately we felt after the assessment center, after the whole process, that we had a candidate that it made the most sense for you to interview this particular candidate. If you remember 2006, Pete, you remember, I know Mike remembers, we had two candidates that we put forward to the selectmen at that time. And so I think we're very comfortable with presenting Chief Carrico for your consideration, and we'll go from there. So that's the process. That's I think Chief Hollinshead will be here on Thursday, or actually back at the townhouse, to be able to introduce Chief Carrico, and I think you'll have a very interesting opportunity to be able to talk to a very experienced guy. When it comes to some of the criteria, just in terms of that we looked at, we spent a lot of time, talking at the beginning about what those criteria would be, and then we had the benefit of having almost engaging a consultant to look at our department, over a period of time, and a person who, because of his experiences and his style and his personality, was able to, engage deeply with the fire department and kind of help us with a little bit of assessment. We were looking for independent leadership, somebody who had a strong capability to manage the administrative layer, had experience with the call fire department, understood labor considerations, put a high premium on professional development, both for him or herself, but also for our department going forward. Appreciated the value of a deep community engagement, had an executive presence to be able to step in a small department, and like Chief Meany, to be able to kind of represent the town as a one of our leaders. We were looking for external outreach to our neighboring communities and also to professional organizations. We thought would be something that that would be important. Somebody that was forward-looking and had also finally the experience with understanding, at least, and the appreciation of what the ALS issue is all about, and what the implications are for towns as they either manage that or move in that direction. And I think using all of those considerations, I think we have recommended a candidate who kind of checked off all of those boxes.
Pete?
Sounds like you did a lot of work, so thank you so much.
Yeah, it was a great group, I will say. It was a very, very highly collaborative group, from the beginning. I think that, we met a number of times, and, everybody in the committee, the cooperation, and at the end of the day, just, appreciation for, for the experience of, bringing somebody to town that we hope will be somebody of significance for into the next generation. Maybe not 28 years, we can't guarantee that, but certainly into the years to come, so.
Yes. 3 questions.
Yes.
First, now this is mostly me learning. What's our administrative rules? Does the fire chief have to move to Medfield or have to move within 10 miles or?
We have no residency requirement, but we've talked about, we're talking about all the candidates, is that we would anticipate somebody moving within a 20 to 30-minute response.
Okay, and that's obviously a criteria that is be passed. What was the second question I had?
That was
Nature of the
actually two questions, I thought.
No, that's just the one. Second, what's the nature of the contract? Contract is 3, I don't know what the contract would be, or whether we have a contract, or how's that
So
gonna work?
we will need to talk about that. You currently do not have contracts with any of your department heads.
Yes.
So we can talk about that possibility.
If that's 20 minutes away, right, is that in the evening or all day long?
Only when fires occur.
He's at the station, right? Does he go home?
He does go home. So we talked a lot about his accessibility to be able to reach to our, our department, and we knew that we were, we weren't gonna be able to replicate the same model that we had for 28 years necessarily.
But you've got no deputy right now.
We do have a deputy.
No, you don't, but he's the water department, right?
Well, we have, and one of the things in terms of the future will be to find a chief that can help us to build a command structure.
So you're gonna start from scratch?
Well, I don't think we're starting completely from scratch. We have a couple of lieutenants, we have
Yeah.
a
They haven't
deputy.
been lieutenants that long.
Huh?
They haven't been lieutenants that long.
That's right, but that's the beginning of, they were promoted to that position because somebody felt it was appropriate for them to be a part of the command structure.
I understand that.
So what's the issue?
Huh?
What
The
is it?
issue is personnel, you've gotta deal with them in town, people in town.
That it?
Like I come in there and I start bitching,
Yeah,
right? How are they gonna handle me?
maybe that
Same
would
as
be.
I do.
She handles me well.
Exactly. Send Tom to Christine. That was, give him a little
Part
time.
of the assessment center. You have to do it, Tom.
You get ready for the next one.
I told the selectmen tonight, I challenged them, I challenged the school committee, and I challenged the warrant committee. And I will challenge you too.
Go ahead.
Being the chairman of that committee. Because I feel that you should have somebody that knows the town. That's very important from day one. You can't just go out and ride around the town. You gotta be in that truck, or you gotta be in the command vehicle.
Here's the thing that you come to realize is that there are these values, and sometimes they're actually competing values, that to have somebody that knows the town is kind of is a very high value, you come to appreciate. But to know somebody as well who can bring some objectivity to the force, maybe to be able to look at it, or, over time, from a distance, to be able to do it. And those things are kind of yings and yangs a little bit, when you're hiring somebody. So you always deal with the question of, we always want people who understand the culture of Medfield, who appreciate, the specialness of this particular town. And on the other hand, that needs to be balanced against the opportunity to be able to, continue the evolution by bringing a perspective that's an outside perspective, that's a professional so that's what we balanced in terms of looking, to find this. And I think in this particular instance, after having had 28 years of a chief who came from town, who knows this town, exceptionally well, that maybe it was time for the further advancement by bringing a perspective that might not be, from the inside of the town.
The way that I look at it too.
Yeah.
I know Billy, he's done a good job, he's been around a long time. I know him since he's a kid.
Yeah.
But I worked out of town for the Commonwealth for almost 25 years. When I came back, I started looking around and I didn't remember the roads that are out there. I had to reorient myself around this town. I really didn't know.
Yeah.
And prior to that, I was in real estate and I sold a lot of these properties. But I had to start thinking, where are they? I used to know every single house in that counting estates, who lived in it, the whole bit. And that's very unique. And then Billy's that type of kid too.
Yeah.
He knows where all the seniors are, he knows where, and guys came to my house, president guys on there now, were a great bunch of guys, and they didn't know what door to come to my house. It's a two-family house. So they're outside. Finally, I went outside, my wife did, because I was the guy that had the stroke. They went out, she went out and got him, he's in the house. And she had the same thing, she had a thing too, but that's where my biggest concern is from. When you hire somebody, you know, how long does it take them to get on board, really on board and working effectively with the department, with the people in Medfield?
Let me just, by way of example, and, you know, again, not to, you know, Chief Hollinshead came on board, I think he was effective within the first week of being on board in many ways. So if the question is kind of effectiveness, I think we have a model of, you know, maybe some onboarding to kind of produce some, you know, very fast level of effectiveness. Is it going to replicate the, you know, the institutional knowledge that Bill Kingsbury built and you know, leaves with? I don't think exactly, but, you know, that's, to me, is the...
There's no probationary, right?
There's no...
No probationary, no period of time where he has to prove himself out?
I don't think there'd be a probationary period of time for...
We have not finalized a contract. I can't begin negotiating a contract until the selectmen actually appoint someone. But we usually put in a probationary period for all of our.
Okay, that's what I'm concerned.
But
Mike Sullivan is still in his.
Yeah.
I'll be up to see.
We just replaced the DPW director with Mo Goulet, who, again, I would agree with Scott, was effective within the first, you know.
I interviewed him
weeks of
too,
being here.
actually.
You did.
And I gave Mo a hard time. And I knew Mo from Easton when he worked down there. So, I mean, I know a lot of these guys because I was on the road with the Department of Revenue. We went to the different towns, and they were all introduced to us, all, right through the whole thing. Selectmen, assessors, DPW, because we looked at, the day when I was there, we looked at them all, because what we were doing, we were in there doing these studies on the towns and what they needed to come up to speed, like computers. When I started, there wasn't a computer in any town in the Commonwealth. The cities have it, but, you know, the old giants. Now, you know, everything has changed, like grandchildren, but you still gotta know the people.
I guess you have a third question. Oh, sure.
Mrs. Sweeney, your point is well taken. If I can comment on that, it'd be my pleasure, okay? To the point of Chief Kingsbury and what he created here in this number of years, did a phenomenal job in the people that he has hired through the years and prepared them for leadership positions to a certain level, okay? And I think, and I feel quite comfortable when I walk away, that the individuals that are here on this department, whether they're paid a call, will do a phenomenal job in the first 10, 15, 20 minutes, hour of an incident, okay? And there's an old saying out there in our world is that when the fire chief shows up, sometimes things go bad. So that my goal in the short time was to prepare people for those kind of out on the street incidents. The fire chief's position has changed tremendously in the last 5, 10, 15 years. And I think that the town is very fortunate with the members they have here. But I think that there needs to be that next step in the fire service in general, as Mr. McDermott mentioned, relative to internal and external exposures. So I think that the town is heading in a phenomenal direction relative to the fire department. What you've created here, the investment you put into the fire station, equipment and the personnel, you're going to head in a great direction with that. So I feel comfortable, whether it's a 20-minute ride for the next fire chief, and so be it. But I feel comfortable the members here will handle things quite well and quite confidently, and most importantly, most professionally. So
Is he currently a chief in Situate?
Yes, he is.
Where was he before Situate?
Sandwich.
Sandwich.
He was in Halifax. He was the chief in Halifax.
Yeah, I know them all.
And then a lieutenant in Duxbury before that, and then a professional engineer before that.
Yeah. I worked in all those towns.
I'm glad to chat with you anytime, sir. I'm available.
My third question was, given that there's a single candidate coming to meet us, and this is my first time of actually interviewing any major hire like this, is there any, obviously, if we uncover some major character flaw that you've missed in your comprehensive evaluation, we would bring it up and we would stop this in its tracks. But is there anything specifically that we need to be accomplishing as part of this overall process through meeting him on Thursday, or is this more meeting him just to get to know him?
No, it's meeting him, and you're making the decision based on your interview questions, if this is a chief that you feel fits the department. you basically task the committee with doing the background investigation and the background work to bring you the best possible candidate or candidates, and then it's your job to interview. I mean, we're all going to resign, and you'll have to have a new committee.
A new interim chief.
That's going to be process. But seriously, it is up to the Board of Selectmen on your interviews whether or not you feel comfortable moving forward with it. There is some background information that you and the three of us, the four of us, can go over, that will be confidential personal information prior to the interview.
What time's Thursday night?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock,
And we'll be back
Back
at
in town hall.
We're back home.
Upstairs.
back in town.
Okay.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, guys.
Very good.
All right, just a couple of last things. Consent agenda. Does anyone have an objection to either item on the consent agenda? I have a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda as stated.
I move that we approve both items on the consent agenda as stated.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, any town administrator update?
Just a couple of things. The latest figure I have on the snow deficit is 115,000. I am carrying in my budget estimate 125,000, so we're still within that. And hopefully we're done with the snow, but you never know. Reminder that the transfer station will be open on Sundays for the month of April and as far into May as we need to, so that people can get their brush disposed of, and that's going very well. I understand they are getting a lot of brush in these days. So. And Thursday night's meeting, or certainly next week, I think you will need to take positions on the articles so that you can be ready for town meeting. And if you need any background material on any of these, please let us know and we'll try to put it together for you.
Okay. Put them on the agenda for both nights and see what we get to. All right, anything else, Mike?
Nope.
Selectmen report, Pete.
Just for those people that are worried about the fact that the Medfield Foundation Volunteer of the Year plaques have disappeared from the townhouse, it's because there was an event to recognize the volunteers this year, and the plaques went to the event, and now they're going to be coming back to the townhouse in a couple of days.
That would be a great relief tonight.
Yes. Things are copacetic in Medfield.
Certainly, the Medfield Foundation Awards were a great event to go to, and Pete and the other key people with Medfield Foundation deserve a lot of credit for that. But it was a great event. I was impressed with the number of award winners and the different things that they did in the different ages, so that jumped out. The only other thing I have is it looks like we'll be able to schedule an ALS public information meeting at the center. While I was there on Sunday, I asked Roberta if there'd be interest on the part of the seniors to get briefed on the ALS article. She thought they would. We haven't set a date yet, but we're targeting probably school vacation week on the theory that the seniors might still be in town even if other people are not. And we also have a kind of a more major public information session scheduled for Wednesday the 25th. That'll be at 7 p.m., so that will end at the Public Safety Building.
Does that overlap with the Dale Street walkthrough? It's possibly being planned? I've only seen things passing by my face. So we may want to talk to the permanent committee about that, what they're planning.
Is that a public walkthrough or is it a walkthrough for the committee?
I think that they were talking about a public walkthrough before that. I haven't.
On which date though?
25th. On the 25th.
At night?
Yeah, so you may want to just check in with them about what kind of things they're,
So who is the group that's doing this?
it's the public, it's the permanent building committee,
Oh,
those guys.
and why is that an interference?
Well, I would assume that if we're looking at two overrides that need to be done, and we're looking for a wide range of public information on all of these things, that we may not want to put two major override items together at the same time as competing venues, as opposed to being able to give as much information as possible to everyone.
Just because, I think what you're saying is, so people
Yeah,
don't
sorry,
have to
is
choose
it
which
after
one
9?
they're attending, is the public hearing for ALS or the walkthrough?
Right, do you know where they're holding it?
Well, I would assume that they walk through the Dale Street building, but, yeah, but I don't know if there's a meeting.
Maybe we'll figure out exactly what that involves and if it's really a public for them or not.
But, yeah.
So. And you guys, are you planning to address a selectmen's meeting on the ALS article?
Yeah.
On the
Yeah,
17th?
yeah, I was assuming it would be a quick, there may be, I've invited the committee members that can make it to come, but my intention was just to give you a quick briefing.
Okay.
And I assume that based on that, then you'll vote on where you come out on that article, but, yeah.
And I assume the minority report folks will be there as well for that?
I can have them there if you want. There are no minority reports.
Well, the
There is no-
alternative.
The alternative, sure.
So we'll have to pick between those two presumably for our.
Well, so just to go through the process here, there are two private citizens who at this point plan to make a motion on the floor to amend the article. There are not two articles.
No, I understand.
So I'd be more than happy to have them come in and do that if you'd like, sure.
Yeah, because they're members of the committee though.
They are not speaking for the committee. Be very clear on this.
No,
The committee's made a recommendation.
Right.
Two members of the committee, as private citizens, are planning to make a motion to amend the article.
Right.
You would like to hear from them.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Obviously. I mean, those are the two positions that are going to be presented, and they are members of the committee though.
They are.
Right.
They are not speaking as members.
Of course not,
Yeah,
because they're
okay.
the minority.
Okay.
I
Right.
have that scheduled for April 7th.
April 7th, okay.
For, what did you just say, April?
April 17th.
17th. I thought you said April 7th, and for a minute there, I felt like I was in a time.
It's possible.
Okay.
You're really
Yeah,
late to get
17th,
ready
yeah.
for that.
Next Tuesday, next
Next
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Great, okay, got it.
And with respect to that, are you both comfortable if we take up the 41 Dale Street 40B project as well?
Yeah.
And deliberate and
Sure.
reach a conclusion
Yep.
On the 17th.
on the 17th?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
we'll do that.
Yep.
For my second report, I just want to second all of Gus' comments about the Medfield Foundation Volunteer Appreciation Event. It was great. Thanks for doing it, Pete. Good job, as always. Thank you. It was terrific. All right. Anything else? Unless there's anything further, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.